So I am Scott Burns. I'll introduce the rest of our panelists in a moment. But first, we're going to start with a quote from a book. It's Joan Didion in her first novel, Run River, 1963. Quote, she had asked Knight last week when he was driving to Berkeley to pick up some new books in one of the paperback bookstores along Telegraph Avenue. The books could no doubt be found, Knight had informed her, right downtown in Sacramento. She did not seem to realize that there were now paperback bookstores in Sacramento. She and her father would never seem to get it through their heads that things were changing in Sacramento, that Aerojet General and Douglas Aircraft and even the State College were bringing in a whole new class of people, people who had lived back east, people who read things. Well, actually, Joan Didion got it wrong. For those of you that saw some of the slideshow Mary Ellen started us off with, we had bookstores in Sacramento since practically the very beginning, 1850. But I'm going to try to share my screen here in a moment. 1 second. Should have had this set up. Pardon me for just a moment. I get off the whiteboard. All right. If you enter History of Sacramento book, first of all, can you see the screen that I'm sharing?
No, you are not sharing yet.
I am not sharing it. Let me go back again a minute. Share screen. Share. All right.
You're still on your whiteboard, Scott.
Still on the whiteboard. We'll try one more. I guess this is what we should have tried out when we were practicing, huh? Let me try one more time. Share screen. There we go. How about that?
Yes. Now you just need to start the slideshow and we've got it.
Yeah. Now, all right. So, history of Sacramento bookstores. As I started to research this, I found that there really isn't a history of Sacramento bookstores, and you're not going to get one tonight either. I planned on doing a lot of research, but COVID interfered with that. I thank Mary Ellen for having photographs, but except for photographs, it's hard to find information on the history of Sacramento bookstores, because if you enter history of Sacramento bookstores in Google search, you get 0 results in about 0.4 seconds. Now, if you remove the quotes and just look for history Sacramento bookstores, you get a list of every bookstore in Sacramento that sells history books. Ross, you'll be glad to know that Capital Books is at the top of the list if you do that, but we're not going to show that at the moment. So instead of doing an elaborate history, I thought it might make sense today to deal with memories of bookstores, and particularly to give us some focus on my memories and your memories. And for our purposes today, to give us a little more focus so we're not dealing with too much to deal with, we're going to be focusing on the period essentially of the 70s and 80s and to date. I picked the 70s and 80s because that's when I first became a collector of books, something beyond just a casual reader. And at the time, Sacramento was home to 30 independent bookstores, actually better than 30 independent bookstores. That has developed, of course. Some have gone, some have come anew. And I'm going to give a quick introduction right now of the additional panelists that you'll be hearing from later. Just for those of you that weren't in on the preliminary discussions, our agenda tonight is I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, giving kind of an overview of what Sacramento bookselling has been like in the last 50 years. Then we're going to turn it over to our panelists. We have Sue Richards from Crawford's Books. We have Ross Rojek from Capital Books on K. And then we have Miranda Culp from the new kid on the block, Amatoria Books, formerly Richard Press Fine Art and Scholarly Books in Midtown. So you'll get a little bit better introduction to them in just a little bit. First, about bookstores generally and what attracts us. First of all, we need to recognize that a memorable bookstore, and Sacramento's had many of them, is not just a place to find books. And when I talk about books, I said that I'm a collector, but when we talk about books, we can be talking new, used, rare, but bookstores have a function besides selling books. They're also a place where you can get recommendations from knowledgeable booksellers or their staff, owners and employees, occasionally enjoy a visiting author or a poet, connect with friends for spirited discussions, browse the stacks, or sometimes curl up with the cat and indulge your passion for reading. But again, not tonight. Am I still sharing, by the way?
Yes.
All right, just wanted to make sure. So there's most of the bookstores in Sacramento are cat-free. They haven't always been that way. So just to start off, these next 3 slides is just going to be a list. These are the bookstores, the independent bookstores, or the bookstores that have been in Sacramento from 1970 to date. The ones that are highlighted in yellow are still with us today. And I'm going to go through the list and just, for the most part, just kind of read the list. Some of these may trigger memories of your own. And I'll make some comments about a few of them, because you may not be aware they're there, particularly those that are still around. Okay. So ABC Books and Gifts, a Russian-Ukrainian bookstore out in the Carmichael area. A Brighter Child still exists, and that is for sells books for homeschooling. All Things Literacy is in the Meadowview area, specializing in African-American books and features. Amatoria Books, you'll be hearing from Miranda Culp later, but they're the new ones on the block, or at least newer. They specialize in fine art books. Argus Books. Argus Books we'll be talking about a little bit more in length in a few minutes, but Argus Books now exists only online, but Argus Books was the rare and collectible out-of-print bookstore in town for many years. Almost Perfect Bookstore was out in Citrus Heights, America's Legal Bookstore in downtown. A Seat at the Table, frankly, I forget where they were. Avid Reader, Ross has already mentioned them. They're on the 20th Street now, but formerly at the Tower, and before that downtown and still in Davis. Bane's Mystery Bookstore, Barnes and Noble. Actually, rather than just read this list, I'm going to kind of go through a little bit slower and make a few comments on some of them. I think that may be a little more efficient of time. Going back up to Argus Books, I mentioned that that was significant. Argus Books was run by Herb Kaplan, kind of a roly-poly gentleman, first on Riverside Boulevard and then moved to Capitol. But if you were into collectible books, rare and out of print, Argus Books was the place in Sacramento. Not only did he have a successful shop with an international reputation, but several of the bookstores in town, he served as a mentor. So I mentioned that Barry Cassidy, Rare Books, we haven't gotten to him on the list. Barry Cassidy started as a tutor of Herb Kaplan. I started as a tutor of Herb Kaplan. Richard Press Fine Books, who Richard passed away last year, and Miranda and Laurelyn are now running the shop under the name Amatoria, but Richard was was tutored by Herb Kaplan. Don Connor, Rare Books. So if you go through the existing rare and out of print booksellers in town, you'll find that at least a dozen of them started out by being customers or students of Herb Kaplan at Argus Books. So as we continue going down the list, I mentioned Barry Cassidy, Rare Books. When Herb Kaplan died, Herb's inventory was kind of spread out amongst essentially 3 dealers. Argus Books, Bill Ewald still runs it, but only appears at book fairs, and he has a stall now in the in the Nevada City area at the Grass Valley Bookstore. Barry Cassidy, who's at 20th and T, started selling books when he was a teenager in 1975, mentored with Herb, and then took about a third of Herb's inventory when Herb passed. So about a third went to Bill Ewald, a third went to Barry Cassidy, and then all of the art books went to Richard Press. Richard Press had formerly been a librarian and an excellent librarian at Northwestern University, put together some very major collections, and was one of Herb's customers. And then when Richard moved to Sacramento, he decided to open his own store. And around the time that Herb passed on, Richard took most of his inventory. So Herb Kaplan was very significant. Beers Book Center, of course, as Mary Ellen said, has been around since 1932 in one form or another through, I believe, 4 owners and 4 different locations. But of course, most everyone, at least in Sacramento, has probably been to Beers Book Center or Beers Books at one time or another. We've had a number of paperback bookstores, the Book Check, the Bookworm. The Book Collector was at 24th and 24th and K in Midtown. And then the Book Den, now run by the Friends of the Sacramento Public Library, a major source for used books. Book Mine in Old Sacramento. Books with 3 dots. This one is one of my favorite bookstores. Most people don't even know it existed. But for those of you who've been in Sacramento for a while, you may remember the World Theater, which was on 9th Street between I and J across from Cesar Chavez Park. And Books, ... was in the basement of the theater, a huge basement, almost 18,000 square feet filled with books. And I don't know if I ever saw a customer in there other than myself. Frankly, I think it was a way to launder money, but it was a fascinating bookstore with an incredibly huge inventory. I say one of the unique things about Sacramento is we've never had one of those huge used bookstores like Strand's in New York or Powell's in Portland. We actually did. It was called Books. It's just that they never had any customers, and you had to know that that little door next to the entrance to the World Theater led down to a basement to get to it. So Borders, of course, ubiquitous. Capitol Books on K is Ross's new enterprise. He'll be talking in just a little bit, but he was preceded first by Capitol Books 1 and 2. Capitol Books 1 was on 21st Street in Capitol, and it was a paperback shop for the most part, and it was where you went if you wanted risque, dirty books. But Capitol Books 1 was significant because if you ever go to a Deseret or a Goodwill and you find a paperback book, if it came from Capitol Books, the stamp Capitol Books will be on the title page. Every book that passed through his hands was rubber stamped Capitol Books. So you still find them now and then. John, when John passed away, he sold the bookshop to Bill Wood. Bill Wood moved it to 14th and S, and he ran it there for a couple of years, and then it was sold to another gentleman. Capitol Books on K, we'll introduce Ross in a little bit. Carol's Books and Things was the first Black bookstore in Sacramento. Started on Freeport, then moved a little further down Freeport to the Lanai Shopping Center, then moved to the Southland Park Hills Shopping Center where I live, and then finally to Del Paso Boulevard. Unfortunately, Carol died just 2 years ago. And then we have Chloe's Bookstore. Chloe's Bookstore was on McKinley at 35th, and Chloe's was the best bookstore I've ever dealt with in my life at searching things. Back in the old days, if you were a collector and there was no internet and you wanted a book, you went to a book dealer, you put in a want list, and then they would search for you. And how they went about doing that is beyond this presentation. But I still have in my collection, I probably have 20 books that Phil and Chloe found for me that I still have never, in 40 years of collecting, have never found another copy. I don't know where they dug them up. Cobblestone Books was in Citrus Heights, College Oak, up by AR, dealing in science fiction and fantasy. Crown Books, the ubiquitous chain, was in the Natomas area. Dimple Records, I think they folded because they expanded and opened bookstores and it became a loss for them. East West Bookstore, New Age, Half Price Books is now out in the Fair Oaks area. Image Weaver, again, another one of those bookstores most people haven't seen. It lasted only a couple of years, but most of you have probably been to Tower, at one point or another, went to Tower Books on Broadway. But before it was Tower Books on Broadway, it was Image Weaver. And he had an excellent, it was probably competitor to Beers for about 2 years. La Raza Bookstore in Galleria was the first Hispanic bookstore in town, related to La Raza Galleria. Levinson's Books, Liberty Books, my favorite bookstore of all time, 51st and Folsom. Liberty Books was kind of like if you ever wanted to go into the wand shop in Harry Potter, Liberty Books was the bookstore version of it. About 1,200 square feet, stacked with shelves, but most of the store was stacked on the floor, 6 feet, 7 feet high. And John, who ran the place, wasn't particularly friendly, but you could browse in there for hours. And he didn't care if you moved from stack A to stack B or rearranged everything, no problem at all. But that was a fascinating book. Lioness Books, run by Teresa Corrigan, was the first feminist bookstore, feminist and gay bookstore in town. Mockingbird was on Riverside Boulevard. Nelson's Books and News at the airport. Newsbeat, primarily magazines down in Midtown, downtown. The Open Book, frankly, I forget. The Open Book, gay bookstore on 21st Street. Paperback Exchange in Citrus Heights. Richard Press, I've already mentioned. Time Test, we've already talked about with Peter Teat. Tower Books, of course. Underground Books, now in Oak Park. And that is now an African-American bookstore. Walden Books. And then lastly, Mary Ellen mentioned Weinstock Hales. And many people don't recognize or don't remember or didn't know that Weinstocks or Hales, the Weinstock Hales, had a bookstore on the mezzanine of their 11th and K store. And if you wanted books in Sacramento, you either went to new books, I should say, you either went to Levinson's or you went to Weinstock Hales. And Weinstock Hales was unique in that not only did they sell new books, but they also rented new books. For 10 cents a week, you could rent a book, and as long as you kept it in good shape, they'd put it back on the shelf for sale. So that's our list of bookstores. And hopefully that'll kind of stir some of your memories. And when we get around to the rest of the discussion, I'm sure it'll raise some questions. But what we're going to do now, in just a few minutes, is introduce our panelists, because one of my ulterior motives for this program is to introduce our guests tonight, particularly those of you who live in Sacramento, to what book selling is like here in Sacramento now. And we have 3 guest panelists, each with a different approach to book selling. But before we do that, I do want to just define a couple of terms because they may come up. When we're talking about books, you're going to hear new books, used books, out of print books, and rare books. So I just want to make it clear to everyone that a used book may still appear new, while what appears to be a new book may actually be quite old. Not all old books are rare. Some rare books are new. Out of print can be new, used, or rare. And none of these terms have anything to do with value. Value is purely a question of supply and demand. So when we categorize a bookstore as a new bookstore or a used bookstore or a rare bookstore, it's really not so much about what they stock, because a good bookseller is going to sell whatever they can make a buck with and whatever their customers want. So while we all have approaches, it's really a question of the customer base they cater to. You know, are their customer base readers, collectors, compulsive, hoarders, investors? Reader is obvious. The others kind of come and go and take all different shapes. Compulsive is probably the odd one. I love compulsive buyers because they make sales, but we're not going to get into collective and bibliomania. What we really want to do is talk about bookstores. And so what we're going to do now is let each of our panelists talk for 8 to 10 minutes, discuss their shops, their approach to selling, what they kind of see the future of book selling. And just by way of introduction, again, we're going to start off with Sue Richards from Crawford's Books on just off Freeport near Fruit Ridge. Then Sue will be followed by Ross Rojak, who runs Capital Books on K next to the Crest Theater on K Street near 10th. And then Laurel and Gilmore and Miranda Culp, Amatoria Fine Art Books at 19th and F.
Scott, can you start sharing your screen, please?
Oh, you betcha. One second. I got to get back to Zoom to do that. I'm having problems getting back to Zoom. 1 second.
I was able to do it for you. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thanks. Sorry about that. So the one thing I will say that I've been, of course, to all 3 of these bookshops, and all three of our panelists, their shops share some characteristics that make a good bookshop. So by way of introduction, my term, a good bookshop, has, first of all, a good breadth of stock. The books are in good condition, a clean, light, and airy environment, friendly staff, displays to point out things you might not otherwise know, and a tolerance for browsing. Different shops cater to different clienteles. Sue and Ross tend to cater for have shops mainly for readers. My website particularly is for collectors. Melinda and Laurel cater to both, as well as academics and artists. But with that, I think it makes sense to let them each talk about their own shops. And I had little slides to show pictures of their shops, but Mary Ellen, do you have some already? Because I seem to be deficient in the sharing category. But we're going to start off with Sue Richards, Crawford's Books. Oh, actually, 1 second, I do need to share for one moment. Mary Ellen, I'm going to interrupt. But I just remembered that Sue asked me if I could share a video that was just done for her shop. And I would like to share that for just a moment first. So let me share the screen, if it will let me do that. Is that sharing? It's not.
Hi, welcome to Crawford. I'm Sue Richards.
One moment. I don't want to take too much time if it's not working, but it doesn't appear to be letting me share the video. Tell you what, Sue, why don't you go ahead?
Sue would like to send me the link. I'll share it at the end.
That sounds great.
Okay, I'll
Then I'm
figure
going to
that
turn off
out.
sharing.
Okay.
It's also on my website, so I'm not worried about it, but
right.
I'll send you the link, Mary Ellen. Okay, should I begin?
Please.
Okay. So hi, I'm Sue Richards. I own and operate Crawford's Books in the Hollywood Park neighborhood of Sacramento. My husband, Greg, is a full-time structural engineer, so he helps me create functional use of space in the store. We have 2 teenagers who also work at the store, restocking shelves and working the register. David is a senior and Jenny is a freshman at John F. Kennedy High School in the Pocket. David also facilitated a weekly teen game club that we had before the closure, alternating between Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering, but we've had to pause that for now. My daughter Jenny creates fun fabrics in which she sells that at the store. We have 1 part-time employee, Connie, who's been at Crawford's for over 15 years. So our family has always loved going to bookstores. I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. On vacation, we would scope out the local bookstore in order to get a vibe of the community. For me, bookstores are an integral part of every community. Greg and I spent years dreaming of someday owning our own bookstore. In the fall of 2017, I was reading a book by Jen Sincero titled "You Are a Badass." So one Saturday morning, Greg suggested I go speak to the Crawfords on the off chance they might someday want to sell us the store when they're ready to retire. With so recently being bolstered as a badass, I did it. So Jim Crawford informed me that he and his wife Joyce had been talking that very morning about retiring. It was perfect. So 2 months later, in January of 2018, I quit my job. Jim and Joyce retired, and Greg and I became owners of a bookstore, right about a half a mile from our house. We had many supportive friends who encouraged us and expressed admiration at doing something that they themselves had dreamed of doing. We also had many friends tell us we were crazy. I had very minimal retail experience apart from working 6 months at the Sunrise Mall out in Citrus Heights when I was 17 years old. I did, however, have some skills that I brought to the table. I worked as an office manager for a nonprofit for 9 years. I also worked with children and families in a children's mental health program for 8 years before having kids. I'm an active school parent with lots of friends at Leonardo da Vinci School and John F. Kennedy High School. And with a background in mental health, I understand the power of stories. I love hearing customers tell me their stories, and I also love helping them discover stories that they can connect with. So now to tell you a bit about our store. Crawford's Books is a new and used independent family-owned bookstore located in Hollywood Park. Like Scott said, we cater to readers. There's not a whole lot of rare and out-of-print books. We offer a variety of genres, including fiction, mystery, romance, westerns, science fiction and fantasy, children and young adult, cooking, gardening, military history, biographies and memoirs, science, religion, and personal growth. We have a robust trade credit program in which customers can bring in their books to receive store credit. We sell local authors' books as well as local artists' items. So in addition to books, we sell greeting cards, art, jewelry, fiber crafts, and natural-made skincare products. So while most of our customers live within 15 miles of the store, we are experiencing growing support from outlying areas from Elk Grove all the way to Yuba City. In tripling the size of our children's section, we now have more families visiting the store, which is great. We have a social media presence, and we advertise monthly in Inside Publication and Landmark News. Our customers are people who value local small businesses, who enjoy perusing shelves for a good book, and who want to instill the love of reading to their children. They are also those people who are ready to jump back into the world of reading and are looking for a good suggestion. So we welcome all walks of life and strive to offer something for everyone. So in March of 2020, we shut down Crawford's for 3 months. During this time, we started a curbside pickup and local delivery program. I started offering Sue's surprise packs. These were books at a discount that were hand selected by me based on the customer's interests. Also, through collaboration with a local Army mom, we started a program whereby we ship books to military bases for personnel in quarantine due to COVID. So this program is ongoing, and to date, we have shipped over 1,000 books to bases from Texas all the way to South Korea. Our in-store events include book signings, book club, team game club, and music recitals. Most of those are on hold right now, or we've moved them to online. So as California started opening up once the shelter-in-place order was lifted, our store was the first place many visited. They expressed dismay that bookstores were not considered essential, which I'm still surprised by, but anyways. And they expressed gratitude to having the opportunity to actually browse a store. I believe COVID has instigated drastic change in our society, but not all of it is bad. With the threat of stores and restaurants going out of business, communities rallied and found unique ways to support their local businesses. I have received more donated books and more email orders this past year than the previous 2 years before. So during this time, people took action when they saw just how quickly beloved stores and restaurants could disappear. Customers expressed an intentional desire to step away from online shopping in favor of local family-owned businesses. So in conclusion, these last 3.5 years have taught me much about bookselling in Sacramento. I've learned the value of social media, especially in connecting with the younger generations. I've learned communities are willing to invest in local businesses when their survival is threatened. And I have learned that selling books is about so much more than just selling books. It is about relationships and connections. It is about providing a community space for social interaction and fellowship. It is about offering time to browse, to hold books, to go on a treasure hunt and find something you love when you didn't even know you needed it. So I'm deeply passionate about books, and I understand the value of books to educate, entertain, and provide escape. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue. So we're about next to go to Ross, and before I introduce Ross here, as you undoubtedly gathered from Sue, one of the things that bookstores these days need to do to adapt to this new economy and even before COVID is come up with novel approaches to get people into the store, to get them coming back to the store, and to develop some income streams beyond just selling the book itself. And one of the reasons why I wanted to invite Ross and Capital Books on Cave as a panelist tonight is it's not only an excellent bookstore, but he and his wife Heidi have been doing some really interesting things to promote the store and reading in general. And with that, Ross, I'll let you take it over. Once you unmute you.
Yep. All right. I'm unmuted. Am I good?
Yeah.
All right. So as Scott said, I have been in retail for a long time. In fact, 30 years ago this year, I opened up my first comic book store at 21st and J called Beyond the Pale. And it was a crapshoot opening at that point, but it worked for quite a while. My entire life has been based around books. Actually, the comic book aspect of it was kind of an anomaly because I was into real books, normal books with words and no pictures, or occasionally illustrations. And in fact, as you guys were going, as Mary Ellen was going through her list, and she got through, and Scott with Cobblestone, Mike, the guy that owned Cobblestone, had a store before that on Manzanita near Fair Oaks that was a standalone science fiction store. And it's the first independent store I remember spending my own money at. And I was 14 maybe, and I had been going to Walden's over at Country Club on my bike, and they had the Walden's sci-fi fantasy club that you could get a card for and save 10%. And I argued Mike into giving me 10% off on a book from him because I could go get it from them at 10% off, and he gave it to me. And I still remember that book. And I was like, I think it was probably the first book I actually bought with my own money that involved something beyond just picking something up. But I was a reader from as long as I can remember, more so than anything else. And comic books, when I opened up Beyond the Pale, we had Beyond the Pale didn't really explain what it was. The name doesn't tell anybody anything we sell. So underneath the logo said comics, games, and books. And we did comic books, we did games, and we did sci-fi fantasy books. And they didn't sell really great, but they sold well enough for me. We had some authors in for signings back in those days. Raymond Feist was one of the biggest ones I had in for a book signing. And we were at 21st and J for 3 years. Then we moved to 15th and L, where Beers was at the corner with Capitol Garage and, I forget the record store that was there.
Esoteric.
Yep. And so we rented from them for 3 years. And that's when I bought Comics and Comics, and then kind of everything kind of grew and went out of control and the like. But it was at that point that I had met Heidi Kotler, who was the vice president of Tower Books. So back probably 93, 94, she was doing a literacy festival and wanted to have a comic book store there. And so she invited me, and she walked into our store on a Magic card release day, and our store was packed with people, and we're making a ton of money. And we go off to lunch because she was going to, take me out to lunch and use, what she always called it, Uncle Russ's credit card. And then asked casually, so what were all those people doing in your store? And I said, well, it's this card game called Magic Gathering. She's like, what is it? And I explained it to her, and she asked how much we were doing. And I'm like, we're doing like $2,000 a day selling Magic cards. And she's like, I have stores that don't do that much. So I ended up with this gig working for Heidi for like 2 years, 3 years, helping her put card games and comic books and stuff into the record stores at that point when Tower was doing the WoW stores and everything else. So that's my background. But I probably shopped at every used bookstore in town that I could ride my bike to when I was a kid. So Comics and Comics didn't work out. I failed at that miserably and publicly. And I swore I would never get back into retail. I hate retail. Retail is hard. Retail involves retail rents and margins and all of this stuff. And then a couple years ago, the Levinson's book space became available over on 10th. And I saw it somewhere. It was just like this casual, Inside Coffee's gone out of business and the space is available. And I was like, hey, Heidi, let's go look. Let's just look, because it deserves to be a bookstore again. And so we came downtown, and Heidi and I walked all of K Street. We walked from the convention center down to Doco, and it was the first time we'd been to Doco at that point. And it's busy. There's lots of people, there's businesses, all of this stuff. And we found the space next to the Crest Theater that had been Smith Galleries. And before that had been like a Weight Watchers and all this other stuff, but it had been Smith Galleries, and it was for rent. So I took a picture of that phone number. And so we ended up calling like 3 different businesses. And the owner of our space was the most interested in having us here. And he aggressively, we had 3 months worth of lease negotiations to get us in. But for me, the space here with the state workers, with the Crest Theater next door, the whole bit was like, this can work out. It's a large space. We have 3 floors to do stuff in. But a lot of it was just the Crest Theater, because if we want to do a big event, we can do 1,000 people next door. And so that's how we ended up here. And so, I mean, I knew the book industry, and Heidi didn't, but she knows marketing and lots of other parts of the stuff that's in design. But this has been, opening the store was hard. We opened it up basically on a shoestring. My son and I did most of the renovation. We painted it, we ripped mollies out of the wall, because I'll tell you, an art gallery drills lots and lots of screws into the wall, and they don't take them out when they leave. So we had to do all of that. Even my, at the time, 3-year-old granddaughter was helping me lay floor. So, I mean, this is an entire 3-generation family business at this point, with blood, sweat, and tears of all of us. And now we are a very small store. I walk into a Barnes and Noble. I walked into Avid Reader Davis today to go talk to Aaron, and I look at 3,000 square feet and I get jealous. I walk into a Barnes and Noble and I feel bad. And then I realize I have 10,000 books that are important to me. Every book in the store, granted, I have more people are starting to order stuff, but 90% of the books in the store I have picked to be in the store for a reason. They're a good book. It's a story I like.
Yeah, Ross, if I could interject,
yeah.
I just want to say, one of the things that I really like about your store is I can go into a Barnes and Noble and walk around for 45 minutes and not buy anything. I walk into your store, and one of the things about a good bookstore is it's well curated. And as you say, your store is smaller, but I never leave without buying 2 or 3 books.
Yeah. And some of it is I have to find the right book. I might only have one book that's in a category that fits a need, but once I find it, I keep it in stock all the time. And we carry the bestsellers. We carry stuff that I don't really care about but it's selling. So, we carry every one of the San Francisco Chronicle bestsellers in every category all the time, as long as they're selling. But that's what we do is that for us, and COVID caused a huge strain on it, but the idea is that it was a place where you could come in, you could find something, and you could go. So you had the thrillers, you had science fiction, you had the latest, whatever. But on the other end of it, we go deep onto certain things. Science fiction, fantasy is still one of my favorite categories, and so I have a lot. COVID caused a lot of problems. I think I'm pushing my time here at this point.
Yeah. So let's. I do want to mention one thing before we turn over to Laurel, and just because I've found it such a novel way to get some extra money in while we're in COVID. But could you just explain Feast and Fiction for a moment?
All right. So when we came into the store, when we first walked in, the front windows were papered over, and so the entire store was dark. You turn on fluorescent lights. It's a square building. When we walked up to the second floor, there is this wall-to-wall, ceiling-to-floor window overlooking K Street that just lets in a huge amount of light. And that was kind of when we both said, this should be a really great cafe. And I'm into wine. I've been into wine for a long time. And so I was like, maybe we could put in, you know, coffee, beer, and wine, some pastries. Heidi likes to cook. Heidi likes to bake. And so part of getting through COVID was, as it started to release out a little bit, we started up what's called Feast and Fiction, which is we allow a couple. And now that vaccines are starting to become easier to get, we're allowing larger bubbles. So tonight we had 3 people in. And they basically rent this window upstairs, and they get a cheese plate or dessert and then a bottle of wine, and they get an hour and a half in the store to just have a date night by themselves in a bookstore. And it has sold out entirely through the end of June. And we're doing it 6 days a week. And we're getting ready to figure out what we're going to do after June, because we don't know how many people we can put in, or we're going to allow larger bubbles. The other thing that you may not know is that we're also starting renovation on the basement. So the basement is old school first floor Sacramento basement, with includes an elevator going to the sidewalk, which doesn't have a sidewalk anymore, but it's still there. And we're renovating that into what I call the Batcave meets Harry Potter. So it will be sci-fi, fantasy, graphic novels, toys, board games, etc., all underground in a dedicated space. So hopefully by the end of the year, we will have all 3 floors going, and basically 3 different businesses all rolling together in the same place, where parents can roll in, dump their kids into the basement, pick up a book, go upstairs, have a glass of wine, and we will text them, hey, your kid just broke something, so you just bought something else.
Great. Thanks, Ross. We'll
All
catch you more of the Q&A at the end. But since you mentioned art galleries, that certainly brings to mind fine and scholarly arts. And with that, we're going to turn now to Laurelyn. Is it Laura, just you, Laurelyn, today? I know Miranda's on the line.
No, Miranda's here. Miranda, if you want
Miranda's
to
here, okay. So Laurelyn Gilmore and Miranda Culp are the new owners of Amatoria Fine Books, formerly Richard Press Fine and Scholarly Books. So they have done two challenges. One, of course, is opening up a bookstore in the middle of COVID. And secondly, continuing on the legacy of what was really an iconic operation in Sacramento. So with that, Laurelyn, take it away.
Yeah. So most of you, Miranda, if you want to unmute, we can talk together. Do you want to go one at a time? We can just speak together. Hop in if you need to.
Yeah,
so
that sounds good.
Most of you, probably all of you, know of Richard Press Fine and Scholarly Books on the Arts. He was a bookseller in Sacramento for 35 years. The location that we're in now was his for, I believe, 16 years. And I mean, I went there when I was in art school. For me, it's sort of a legendary bookstore because of the specific niche that it fills for the creative community. And of course, at the time, because of Richard himself, I mean, his breadth of knowledge was part of the reason you went there, you know. For me, I'm a full-time artist, and I wasn't necessarily in the market for a 9-to-5, but I drove past Richard Press Fine and Scholarly Books one day and saw that it was open, and it wasn't usually open. So I did a U-turn and I came back and found that the collection had been sold to a gentleman named Lawrence Hammer. And I struck up a conversation with him. I told him, you know, I'm an artist. I have a degree in library science. Art and books and art books are kind of my happy place. So if you need help, I can help. And So I started working with him just to kind of suss out what he had. If any of you had been in the store recently, you know that it was stacked full. I mean, it was every book in there is, I mean, perfectly curated. They're beautiful books. There were a lot of them, and Lawrence needed our help with sort of sussing it out. So it became pretty quickly apparent that he wasn't going to be able to keep it open because he doesn't live here. He lives in Oregon. So Miranda and I were both working with Lawrence at the time, and she'll tell her side of the story, but it just was an unbearable shame to think of that store being gone from Sacramento. And for both of us being art and book people, people who love Sacramento, who have really benefited from the creative community in Sacramento, it was really, I don't think either one of us could have passed up the opportunity. So we purchased a portion of the collection and decided to keep it open. And that was a little bit crazy. It was a pandemic. And, Miranda's kind of grown up in bookstores, but I've never owned a bookstore before. But I do have a great love for books and these books in particular. And I feel very honored and humbled to be able to keep presenting them to the world. So we have a lot of ideas going forward. Miranda can talk a little bit more about that, about what we want to do with the space. Right now, our customer base is generally the creative community. Obviously, it's a broad spectrum in Sacramento. So we have people coming in who are writers and painters, sculptors, people who are jewelry designers, or just art history buffs. And because of the collection, we have something for all of them. So for us going forward, I think we're both really excited about doing things like book signings, poetry readings, live music nights, and collaborations with other art institutions in Sacramento. I have a studio at Verge Center for the Arts, so we're looking at collaborations in that direction, maybe with Crocker. There are a bunch of galleries, there are dance studios and maker spaces all over the place. So there is a lot of opportunity there to reach out. But one of the things before I pass it off, I'll just say, because I think some people might think that our bookstore is not necessarily for them because they're not an artist. But what we found is when people come in and they're looking for something, something to read on the train or something that will keep them interested in general, once they hear kind of what we're about, what we're doing, then they sort of open up a little bit. And if they take the time to wander the store, there's enough there that's beautiful and exciting and interesting and inspiring that generally they'll find something that they're interested in. So it's an odd little niche that is strangely small but also very broad. So it's been really exciting to be embraced by the walkable community who hasn't been able to come into the store in so long, and the creative community who really understands the value of what's in that store because of Richard.
Okay, Miranda, you taking over from here?
Sure, I can just take a few minutes. Hi, everybody. I'm Miranda. I am the co-owner of Amatoria Fine Art Books. It still feels a little weird to say that because it's so very new. We took over the store in November. And like Laurelyn said, I went to work for Lawrence on a lark during COVID. I lost all my jobs. We're both writers. I've actually worked in bookstores on and on off my whole life. I I worked at a little bookstore called Rivendell in Vermont. I worked at Phoenix Books in Noe Valley, which is connected to Dog-Eared Books in the Mission in San Francisco. I worked for Kate for about 5 years. And even earlier than that, my mom ran Dutton's Books down in Southern California. Dutton's had 4 or 5 locations in its heyday, and we're still connected to the Duttons. In fact, they just sent up several boxes of small press and broadsides and whole boxes of vellum that we don't even understand. And so we were actually a really natural fit for this bookstore. It was, as many of you said, it was an interesting time to be a bookseller during COVID. I'll just say for myself, with all of the mayhem that was happening last year, that walking into that store on a daily basis and just visiting with humanity, visiting with an attempt at beauty and truth. That sounds lofty, but it really saved my sanity in a lot of ways. It was like participating in the best of what humanity had to offer when there was just so much chaos happening on the other side, out there in the street. And so this bookstore, I'm sure you've had this experience yourselves, that it feels like it has a mind of its own. And it's like Laura Lynn said, Richard was just a really skilled book buyer. He went all over the world to buy his books. Not now, honey. He was famous for coming back from Europe with suitcases filled with books and leaving his clothes in Paris. And so, it's like Laura Lynn said, when somebody comes in and they don't think of themselves as a creative person, but they just went to India last year. There's going to be a beautiful book on the shelf about India. There are illustrated poetry books there. We collect vintage everything. And also Richard had a very small but juicy collection of books that were produced here in Sacramento. If anybody knows anything about Star Thistle Press, please get in touch with me, because there are some presses that were just so small that maybe only produced a handful of things. And Richard has one of those on the shelf, signed over to him. And so the last thing I want to point out to book people is that we have a really extraordinary section of books on books, books on typography, books on book design, books about paper making, and books about famous bibliophiles, if you want to get that nerdy. Just, a whole range of books about the art of the book. So yeah, we're also really excited about our, the ability to have some events. We're planning our first, our grand opening. We're going to participate in second Saturday on May 8th. And so we're going to have a big sale. We're delighted that I think probably one of the best things that we have going for us is that this store was not accessible to the community for so long, and that people in the neighborhood wander in every day and say, I've lived here for years and I've never been inside before, and I've always wanted to come inside. We feel like we just kind of stepped on a train that was already going. It was very much, it's really been a blessing and a constant delight to even deal with the mundane details of owning this business, because it's such an extraordinary collection of books. And we can say that without reservation, because we didn't assemble it. So yeah, I guess that's all I have to say.
And
Okay.
one last note, we are oh no, that's okay. You already said it. Sorry.
Okay.
All right. Well, then I'll take over again here from a few minutes of pre-wrap up, and I say pre-wrap up because I'm going to have a few extra comments here, and then we want to throw things open for Q&A if any of our guests tonight have any questions. I know some may have already been posted in chat, but when I first agreed to put on this program, it was almost a year ago, and before COVID, and I'm a fairly good researcher and historian, so I was kind of looking forward to doing a history of bookselling in Sacramento. And then when some of my resources dried up, or I couldn't even get access to them because of COVID, I started thinking more about the bookselling aspect, and I realized I was doing a program for Renaissance Society, and it occurred to me that maybe one of the approaches to this presentation tonight would be, rather than just kind of talking about what used to be here, is talk about what's really a renaissance going on right now. And that's the renaissance in bookselling. And our you'll notice, for example, our three panelists tonight, you know, their stores are all opened, at least under the current ownership, within just the past couple of years. We have women-owned bookstores with actually all three, if we count Heidi. But you know, when 20 years ago, the independent bookstores started folding like crazy, and people think it wasn't just Amazon, but it was when once Borders, Barnes and Noble, Walden moved into a neighborhood, the big box stores, the independents started folding. And then, of course, with Amazon and online selling, that really appeared for a while to be the death knell of bookselling. But I use the word Renaissance intentionally. According to the American Booksellers Association, since 2009, the number of independent bookstores in the United States has grown by 35%. The number of print books that are being sold has increased by 15%. The number of ebooks has declined by 15%. So we're in kind of a renaissance with book selling. Hopefully it will continue. You know, there's always those adages: is your glass half full or is your glass half empty? But I think as long as we all commit to independent bookstores and shop local, buy local, and I say that knowing, of course, that I should mention, by the way, we've talked about booksellers. I'm also a bookseller. I am online only, and I cater to rare and out of print, and it's rare. The rare part of my business is selling to someone in Sacramento. I sell mostly nationally and internationally, but I buy all my books locally. Okay, so I'm hoping we'll have some good questions for the panelists to answer. With that, let me just first of all turn these things over to Mary Ellen. I think you've had the chat room open. So
yeah, and I have two questions. You answered a third one already, so all of your stuff on independent bookstores came up.
Okay.
Some people are shy, so they sent me a private message. And this is from somebody who's actually not from Renaissance, but came to us through Eventbrite. That is a bookseller from Indiana. And they have asked if we could ask the panelists the same questions that they get all the time, and they feel that they might be too brusque and don't answer well. And the first one is, I'm looking for a good book to read. What do you suggest? And the other one is, I'm looking for this book, but I don't know the title or the author. I don't know where I read the review, and I don't know if I can describe it very well. Can you help? So their question to you is, how do you answer questions like that when you're posed them?
Okay, Sue, you're unmuted, so we'll let you take it first.
Well, I get that asked the question all the time. I get people who want to get back into reading. And so they say, I haven't read a book in 20 years. What should I read? And then I say, well, 20 years ago, what did you read and what did you like to read? So we always start there of, tell me some books you have read that you enjoyed. I love working with kids. They're my favorite customers because they're so they know what they like. And so we start by saying, do you like stories about made up things? Or, you start real basic with them. It's always fun too when they say, well, do you have this? And they say this really obscure book from 1976. And they look at me like, well, don't you know it? And so I say, wow, you've stumped me. And so you kind of make a joke, and then there's always the internet to explore. But yeah, it's always an adventure when because I have 40,000 books in my store. And the Crawfords, when I bought the store from them, they were still using paper and pencil. So everything was tracked on paper and pencil. And so I have not yet gone electronically, because people say, oh, do you have this? Can you just check if you have this book real quick? And I say, no, but I'm happy to look for you. And so, oh, I lost my train of thought. But anyways, would anybody else like to join in?
So we get that regularly, and it usually boils down to me and our store manager, oftentimes, to figure out the question of what was this book I saw. And we have this one elderly customer who comes in who regularly wants to ask about a book she heard about on NPR. But can't tell me which week it was in that she heard it, or which show it was in, but she knows it was a book and it might have been about money. My manager is much more patient than I am. I will do 2 Google searches and then give up. She will do deep dives trying to find the right thing. But it's a challenge, and it becomes, one of those on the blackboard, sort of scoreboard things when I can figure out which book somebody's asking about based on a color and, a potential part of the subject, and run it down quickly. As I said, 2 Google searches, I'm done. But I don't think people that don't work in bookstores don't understand that there's 12 million books in print. And that, yeah, you may have heard about a book, but there's 50,000 books a month being published. And so, the waterfall of books rolling through my brain is not perfect. But I think on the other end of it is that our ability to do it, I count on it. I'm a smaller store than Sue is at this point. I think we've got 10,000 books in stock. And so I always find it to be a lottery winning ticket when I have somebody who comes in for a book that is not on the bestseller list and is not what I consider a perennial book. And we have it in stock. Because out of 10,000 books and 12 million books in print, it's like a 1.25 million shot that I have the book you're asking about that has been printed in the last 30 years, and I happen to have a copy of it. And yeah, you ask for a book, I have it. I'm going to go down and I'm going to pick up a lottery ticket somewhere because I'm pulling the luck today.
Well, it's a little different
Questions?
situation for us, but I will say, I mean, like if people come in and they ask, for a history of capitalism or something, we're not going to have it. But people have come in and asked for things like philosophy, and for me, art is philosophy. Like that is the breadth of human thought and feeling about things. So if we can strike up a conversation, we can usually get into a little bit deeper, kind of what they're looking for. If they're asking about an artist or a movement and we don't have what they're looking for, or we only have one book that maybe they already have, I will usually Google search for that artist, if I don't know them, then I'll try to find maybe what school they were a part of, what era, what genre, and then see if we have something close. Maybe a person sort of likes that style because they saw one painting or
There's one more
piece and
thing
they
that I
want
would
to
suggest.
expand in that area. I think it's the same. Yeah.
I
What-
was gonna say, there's one more thing that we do, and I don't know if the person who's asking the question, if they deal in used and out of print, so that would be, that would probably be a consideration, but, and this might make other booksellers crazy, but because we have artists who are coming in on a regular basis, or just, people who are appreciators of art, they're almost always gonna be looking for that book. They're going to be looking for that book indefinitely. And so one of the things that we started doing was we created a wish list. We don't have it on the shelf, but I totally know who you're talking about. We come across new stuff all the time. Just give us your information, and we keep a spreadsheet. And when we come across it, we just, we'll give you an email. We'll shoot you an email. And we have some people come in and say, like, my little boy loves trains. Will you just anything about trains? And so that is something that we kind of offer as a service to people. There are always going to be artists who are always looking for particular things. So we just keep an eye out as we go through our buys and stuff like that. So
As much as possible, yeah. I think it's the same with, when someone is interested in a book and they don't know the author or necessarily the plot or anything else, they might know why they wanted it. Like
Yeah.
if it's specific to, for Ross or Sue, if it's specific to, like it's about, a little kid who finds out that he's a chimera, then you can kind of guide them toward something that might satisfy their fancy.
All right, so I have another question that, and Scott might be, I doubt that Ross might be able to answer this one too. And I think it's from Ann Burroughs. And this is, all of us are starting to get rid of our collections. Is there a place, if not your place, other places to get books appraised and to sell them?
So I'll start off that. And there's no particular place. If you have books to sell, or particularly like, you're moving on, or somebody's passed away, the best thing to do is first of all, see if you can make some kind of an assessment as what is it you have. In other words, are these books you've been collecting in a particular area, or is it just, you were a member of the Book of the Month Club for 30 years and you've got a lot of books? Because what you want to do is there's no place to get an appraisal, and or at least not in Sacramento, and so what you need to do is you need to contact a dealer, so a dealer can determine, is it worthwhile, coming out to take a look and give some kind of an assessment. Because, and the reason why I say it's easy to appraise a book or a couple of books. There are resources that every good bookseller has. The problem is, and I'll give one example. I had someone call me. They had a collection of books that they'd inherited from their grandfather or from their father, and they were moving on. And are these worth anything? And I came in and looked, and they had about 800 books on the shelf. And I could tell just at a glance. And I told him, I said, look, I said, most of these 800 books are, they're good books, but it'll take forever to sell them. So if you want to sell them to a book dealer, you're probably going to get 10 to 20 cents on the dollar, because they may have to hold on to them for 3 or 4 years before they can sell them. And so all of these shelves together are probably worth maybe $1,000 to $1,500. I said, except this one. And I pulled the book off the shelf, and I said, I said, if you're in a hurry, it's going to take a while to sell it for a good price. But if you want money now, I can probably get $40,000 for you this tomorrow cash. And I did. Yeah. And so what I'm saying is that, I've seen collections with thousands of books that are what I call dumpster bait. But there's a real precious book inside it. And it may be a common book or whatever. So it's difficult to appraise a collection. You can only appraise the individual books that are in there. Now, a good book dealer who deals in those kinds of things. So for example, if you have the estate of someone who was a book collector, you'd probably be best to call me or Barry Cassidy, who deals in rare and out of print books generally in this town. Those are the two that come to mind offhand. And it's not that we'll appraise the books so much as give an overview and say, look, these ones maybe are worth appraising. These others just take down to Beers and see what they take, and what Beers doesn't take, donate to the Friends of the Library. So that's really about it's really about assessing an overall collection, determining which individual books are worth appraising, appraise those, and then figure out how you're going to get rid of the rest. Because, even with good book collections, 90% of them don't have enough value to really do much with. And
Yeah,
I mentioned, by the way, I mentioned Barry and I, of course, if I had a science fiction collector, I wouldn't hesitate to call Ross, because even though Ross is dealing in new books, he's got the experience, and he's going to, he'll look at that shelf and tell you instantly probably whether you've got some, book of the month club editions, or whether you've got some rare science fiction or comics that may be there.
I'm actually, we've started a discounted section in the second floor just because we have an empty second floor with no ability to do anything with it till COVID's over. But I've been doing more first editions and the like, and the other part of it is that we donate, I want to say 500 to 1,000 books a month to the jail. And we end up with a lot of people who have books who have nothing to do with them, and they're not worth anything, and they dump them here, and then we sort through them, and like a third of them end up going to recycling because they aren't worth anything at all for anybody, and then the rest of them go to the jail. And we do a lot of arcs to the jail as well, but those guys need a constant flow. What I call them, they're the jail rec department, which is the guys who are in charge of keeping everybody happy. They're excited to come down and pick up, a load of books from us, because it keeps everybody happy for a week. In fact, they're coming in tomorrow to pick up, I don't know how many books, but the only two places I know of that are buying books in town in general are Beers Books and Half Price Books. Neither of which really, Half Price Books has some weird formula they use, so they'll scan every book and then give you something for it. But I've found over the years that it ends up being about 10 cents a book. So I think that's what their formula actually is, regardless of what it's worth. But we don't have anywhere nearby until you get into the Bay Area, anybody who's doing an extensive sci-fi fantasy, used book section, which I'm kind of interested in doing. I don't know if I will or not, but I'm contemplating it. But other than that, it gets selling a large collection gets hard.
Yeah, and the problem with that, I said early on that the value of books is all about supply and demand, and large collections, like Ross said, can be difficult because individual books, you see something. I know, well, for example, that Hemingway book. I not only knew it was a good book, but I knew who would buy it tomorrow. But a lot of other books, even really good books, I have, I'm online only. I only have about 500 or 600 books online at any given time. But when I list a book, it is not unusual for me to take, for it, even with rare collectible stuff, it's not unusual for it to be sitting in my store for 3, 4, 5 years before it finally sells. Yeah. And so, well, when you're talking appraisal, I guess the question is, if you're talking appraisal for sale, most dealers are going to want to cherry pick the collection and just let you get rid of the rest of it, because it's either that or pay nothing for it, because the margin is so small and the length of time to sell things is so large. Now, if you're talking about appraising for insurance purposes, that's a whole different matter.
Well,
sorry, Ross, go on. I was just
okay. So I was just going to say on that. I mean, the dirty secret, like in the comic industry, would be somebody would come in with a long box of comics, which is like 300 books, and we would find the 5 or 6 that were worth buying, and we would offer them a price for the entire box. But it really only boiled down to those 5 books we wanted, and the rest of them were free as it was. And collections are like that too, because there's a cost of money, and you know, if you're going to buy a $40,000 book for resale, the question is, are you going to make 5% annually on that over a 4-year, 5-year period where you're waiting to move it? Yeah. And that becomes, I mean, I understand why places like, Half Price Books sell them for 10 cents a piece, because somewhere out of all of that, they're going to get $1,000 book that's going to pay for, God knows how many books that works out. It's a volume industry, but for collectors, it's more like sniping. Here's 1,000 books. I only want this one, and you can do whatever you want with the other 999, but I just want this one book.
Good. So we have kind of a follow-up question to this one, so I'll ask it out of order. But I'm going to do a big plea at the end. There are lots of places I agree, SPCA, each one of the libraries. So if there's not oftentimes much value in selling books, I know. I have 10,000 of them I'm ready to give away. So the next question is, do university libraries want to look at book collections? And Scott, I'm going to open that up to, in general, what is happening with universities and museums and stuff that used to purchase books now? So I'm going to kind of ask more of that. What's the market now?
The market now, and now we're talking about rare and collectible academic books. And the market now is pretty much dead. Many of the major institutions and libraries will accept donations, but their endowments, if they have an endowment, are going to things other than book collecting. If you have something that's truly rare, they really want it, they'll find the money, or they'll find a patron somewhere to get it. But they're no longer interested in buying collections. They're looking for individual things. And part of the problem is not just money, but the major institutions, of course, have been major institutions for decades, if not centuries. And so their racks are filled. Matter of fact, some of them are even deaccessioning because shelf space is a premium. And so again, it's kind of like selling books to a book dealer. If you've got something unusual or rare, there will be an institution or library for it. Matter of fact, one of the things that I do when I go out and evaluate a collection, I don't like the word appraise, but when I go out and evaluate a collection, as a matter of fact, that one collection I looked at with the book I sold for $40,000. I have some of the other things that are more common still in my inventory. I'm still selling them on consignment, but there were another dozen books that we boxed up and shipped and donated to the Beinecke Library in Yale. The Beinecke didn't have any money, but it fit in their collection, and the owners, this family, they were more interested in finding a good home. So universities are still interested in getting books. They just aren't interested in buying books. Oh, you're on mute, Mary Ellen.
Sorry, I was responding to an email. So I'm just going to announce that, yes, we are going to send links to everyone who attended today and to register. You will get a link to the talk. We'll also send you the web addresses, the addresses, phone numbers, and whatever contact information you have, that will go out to you. And we also have a site that's called, that'll be on our YouTube channel. We also have something called Renaissance Cafe, and we will link all of your sites. We'll take one of our best photos, put it up on that site with links to you directly as a thank you as well. Great. And then Scott, we have some things are just comments. We have just a few minutes. Is there anybody who'd like to raise their hand? I'm surprised Tom hasn't said anything. Or do you want to ask a last question, Scott? And then what we'll do is stop the recording, but we'll stay in the green room for a few minutes for those people who are shy.
I guess I'm not sure I have a last question. I do have a last comment I wanted to make. But I won't necessarily be last. Others may have last comments. Other panelists may have last comments too. But one of the things we have to deal with, of course, in this world is that, as I said, the Ross's shop is small, but has an excellent curated collection, but he may not have the book you're looking for when you get in there. Sue deals in new books as well as used, but her new books are primarily mystery thrillers and some current things. So she doesn't have a wide new selection. And of course, Amatoria has a narrow focus. And so these days, inevitably, we all end up shopping online because there's a particular book we want, we can't find it locally. So this is my pitch to say, if you want to shop online, please, if you can, avoid the beast. There is an alternative to Amazon. It's called bookshop.org. I know that Crawford's Books and Capital Books are members of it. And it's essentially just like going to shop at Amazon. The difference is, first of all, I should mention it won't be as cheap as Amazon because Amazon undercuts everybody. But you'll be able to find the book you want, and you'll be able to say, I support Crawford's Books or I support Capital Books, and your favorite bookstore will get 30% of the cut. Now, I don't know whether that's 30% of retail or net. I don't know how that works out. But again, there is an alternative to Amazon. So please use it if you can't shop, if you can't shop locally to find what you're looking for.
We have, and I don't know if everybody else does, but we have our website has all the books in print on it, and then tells you how long it's going to take us to get it because it's tied into the publisher databases. So we have access to 3 million books in print up in Oregon that comes to us every day, like 24 hours turnaround. So for some of our customers, we are faster than Amazon. You order before noon, we have the book. But yeah, bookshop.org is really, really good for indie bookstores. Anybody that's using it, it's 30% of gross. So it is a big chunk. We have a page there, and it pays, I would say, in a year, half our rent for 1 month, which is not bad as a small store. It's what I consider free money. I have no idea who buys from us there, but it works. So,
yeah, Mary Ellen.
Tom, I see you. Tom,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Tom has a question.
Yeah, Gary. Yeah.
Oh,
What about Borders Books? Any comments on it?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Borders Books, the one that closed over on Fairfield Park. Yeah.
any comments about Borders Books?
Yeah, but Borders was a victim of its own success. The problem, we're probably all familiar with Borders. Everybody who ever had kids went browsing at Borders. It was a good Friday night's entertainment, cheap entertainment. The problem with Borders expanded too much. They were slow to recognize what Amazon was doing to the industry. And they had huge stores with huge inventories, large floor space, so they were very expensive to operate. And but they didn't adapt well. And I mentioned earlier that I could go into wander in Barnes and Noble for 45 minutes and leave without anything, as opposed to going into Capital Books on K and always finding a couple of things and leaving in 10 minutes. And that was the problem with Borders. They were huge, but it wasn't well curated. They had a lot of books in a lot of categories, but it was so large that, the salespeople were clerks. They weren't knowledgeable. So if you wanted, if you went and said, I want a book by Samuel Delany, it was one of his first books, and I can't remember the title. Okay. If you were to ask me or Ross or anybody who's in a good bookstore that deals in science fiction, you could rattle off half a dozen titles and you'd walk away with your book, or at least know what it was. You couldn't do that at Borders. And then they just expanded too much. They came out with an e-reader that was a competitor to the Amazon Kindle, and it was a big failure. And ultimately they were done in by their debt burden.
Great. And we're now going to ask Tom Tom has a question he wants to ask.
No, I don't have a question. I'm gonna make some comments. One
Okay.
about, I deal in lesser priced books and than rare books, but I deal a lot in California history, Native American, and all nonfiction books, used books mainly. But I find that what's interesting is certain books seem to sell all the time, even though I might pick the book up for 50 cents at a Friends of the Library sell, some of these books that I sell for $12, and I keep selling them for $12. I keep selling them for $12. It's amazing to realize that certain people like certain books and they come back for that certain book. And it's amazing to me to realize that that there are books out there that people want. The other thing, people like to come into a store. I have about 10, 12,000 books in the store. That's down in the little town of Locke. And they like to come in there so that they can browse through and look at books. He says, I can go on Amazon or I can go on all these places, but I don't get a chance to look at these books. Even though a lot of my books are sometimes $5, $10, up to, $100 to $200. Most of the time, most of my books are in the $10 to $20 range. But people love to come in and browse, and they come in looking for one thing, and by golly, they'll buy a book from another section in the store that has nothing to do with what they originally came in for. So it is funny to realize having the availability for people to look at books is very, very important.
I might mention that Tom can't keep white trash cooking in stock.
Yeah.
But he also probably has 100,000 books in storage, some of them quite high value if you would ever let those go. So
Yeah.
I was just going to
Yeah.
mention.
I do want to mention, since Tom is a bookseller, I should mention, by the way, and we'll make the list of bookstores available to you all as well. But
Right.
but I should mention, in case some of you notice of something missing, like River City Books. But when I put that list together, in order to keep it somewhat focused, I kept it pretty much within Sacramento limits. So even though Locke is in Sacramento County, I didn't include Tom's store. Same thing. There are, of course, bookstores in Folsom and Roseville, Rockland that I didn't include. I also intentionally excluded campus bookstores, religious bookstores, and comic bookstores, not because they aren't bookstores, but again, I wanted to keep some kind of focus. So I was essentially looking at general purpose used and new and out of print bookstores. So that's what's on the list that you'll see.
But if we showed the slideshow, I did have at least one adult bookstore.
Yeah.
Anyway.
The other
again,
thing that we have in Sacramento that I think you had brought it up is the Anthocarian book sale that comes up, and they haven't had one because of the virus, but it's an excellent place to go looking for books if someone's looking for rare books. I know, Scott, you were there, you and Keith, and had a booth there over the years. And
matter of fact, this is a good point for me to mention. That's the Sacramento Book Fair. It's usually held twice a year at the Masonic Temple at 57th and H. And I spoke to Jim last week. COVID permitting, it's going to resume again this September.
Great.
And for those of you who've never been to one, it's about 40 or 50 dealers, maybe 60 dealers, each of whom has a 10 by 10 booth. And while it's primarily directed at the collector's market, it's just great for browsing because there are a lot of dealers that, unlike some major international book fairs that just deal in high end, the Sacramento Book Fair has some high end material, but is also a great browsing fair and has plenty of stock at the lower values. I also wanted to mention, revisiting the question about appraising books. It never hurts before you contact a dealer. If you want to do a little bit of research yourself, particularly if you just have an individual title or whatever, there are a couple of sites on the internet. I'm just going to mention them, but I'll send out links to them later. but abebooks, abebooks.com has, I believe they're up to 22,000 dealers internationally now have their stock online. And so if you want to see, if you just punch a book in, you'll see how many copies are out there and what they're asking for. Recognize, of course, these are asking prices. Some people have dreams. But if you punch up a book and you see that there's 3 or 4 copies and they're worth $100 to $200 or more a piece, you've got a good book. If you see 300 copies and they're all 10 and 12, dream on. The other thing I would mention is the website of the International Online Booksellers Association, IOBA, IOBA.org. I'm a member of it. And they have on their website some very useful articles on how to identify first editions, how to distinguish between Book of the Month Club and other books. Gee, I've got a collection of Classics Illustrated Comics. Are these the first printings or later printings? How to tell differences. So IOBA.org has got some very good articles that can help you do self-research.
We have another question from Walter Wilson. Walter wasn't able to get his hand up. Walter, can you unmute to ask the question?
Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, it's not a book question, but it's a trivia thing. Years ago, I used to work for Universal Studios and Warner Brothers. You walk into the property department, you walk through the property department, you walk into this room, and there were books stacked floor to ceiling, boxes of books scattered all over everywhere. Someone would have a movie or a TV show. They walk in, pick up a bunch of books, throw them in the box, go throw them on a set, go back, pick the books off the set, and then take them back into this room and throw them in this room. And they sat there for years. And these 2 rooms were just stacked with books. And nobody knew what they were. Nobody ever cared about it. But it was, you'd walk in there, you guys would blow your mind away, see all these books there, and they get touched maybe 4 or 5 times a year. And they just sat there.
Yeah. I'll tack onto that, Walter. I had a friend who used to own a bookstore in Burbank, Book Castle.
I remember.
It was a huge bookstore. And Paul did very well with this huge bookstore, but he made more money each year renting books out by the inch to the film studios than he took in from the retail sales.
Yes. Yeah. Dutton's Books in North Hollywood did the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was crazy. You walk in there, it just was mind boggling. Anyway, that's my trivia. Does anybody know where I can have somebody give me appraisal on maps? I have maps by Queen Victoria's cartographer.
Get a hold of me later. I don't do that myself, but I know some people I can put you in contact with.
Also, the New York Public Library is one of the largest collectors as well. But
Davis might be able to do it too. The library over at Davis, they do a lot of maps over there.
Okay.
They may have.
Thank you.
Also, Scott, another one that's a good site to go to is used.adall.com.
Yes.
And that site has all of them on there, from Amazon to you can go to, I think there's 60 or 70 different books, and you go to the lowest to the highest price, and because that's the way you really want to look. You go, like you said, you go to the highest price, and that's somebody that's dreaming, and on a lot of those. But the other thing is book sales of Northern California is a nice site to go to look for different book sales if you want to go to like library sales and different sales. And right now, if you go to it, you won't find hardly anything on there because of the virus. But normally it gives you all the book sales that are going on, and it's kind of a good site to go to if you're, you can even find, rare books once in a great while at a library sale, but not very often anymore because they sort pretty good now.
So Scott, what I'm going to suggest is that we stop the recording if you want to do any last words, and then we'll go to the green room, which means that people can still stay, but those people that want to get scurried on can. So is there anything you want to say before we thank everyone for coming and thank our panelists?
Well, let me ask first of all whether any of our panelists have any concluding remarks they'd like to make.
I just wanted to share that my mom, right out of high school, worked at the little bookshop at Weinstock. So
Oh, really?
that, yeah. her first job that wasn't
I-
on her little farm. So
You know, I find this is interesting, and I happen to notice that when Miranda mentioned that, you know, she had a family connection to Duttons, which I spent many years in times in Duttons in Los Angeles, and she mentioned working at Dog-Eared in San Francisco, and Dog-Eared and is that and Green Apple are probably my two favorite bookstores in the city. So it's always interesting to learn. I learned to learn these little connections.
And we were asked once again to repeat the website that Tom had, or Tom, can you put it in the chat for everyone?
I'll try.
Okay, or just repeat it one more time.
Used.addall.com. USED.ADDALL.com.
Great. All
And
right,
let me give an alternative to that as well. If that's called a consolidator, and what they're doing is going to all these book sites around the world and consolidating them. Another one that I prefer is called bookfinder.com.
Mhm.
Bookfinder is one word, BOOKFINDER.com.
great. All right, well,
Yeah,
we're gonna
Bookfinder. I go to bookfinder.com when the adult's down.
Anyway, we're going to thank everyone for attending. This will be sent out as a link within 24 hours. We will send out the YouTube link and we'll also add things. So I'm going to thank everyone, stop recording, but we'll go to the green room.